And now I'd like to invite Reverend John Butler to share the message with us. He's talking about the 4 stages of prosperity consciousness.
Thank you very much. You know, the Taoist master said many years ago that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years prior, and then the second best time was yesterday. And a wise minister said the best time to have given a sermon was yesterday, especially when you're being videotaped. So the thing I love about driving into church this morning and this time of year is that I drive on Highway 20 and I drive past these beautiful daffodils along the highway. And there's only a handful of people that know why those daffodils are there, and you are going to be the elect to know. 10 years or so ago, this church used to meet in the Children's Farm Home Chapel, the orphanage chapel that they had there. And then they changed their policy, and so we became nomads and had to leave. And as a gesture of giving back to them, and we paid them rent, and you know it was a perfectly legitimate thing, but we took the extra step of getting together one Saturday morning and planting bulbs. And we planted bulbs along all those elm trees along the front, and what we planted was daffodils. And when you plant one daffodil, the first year you can barely see them. I mean, it's just one little tiny little daffodil. And the second year I drove by, it's like, God, none of them lived? I mean, I could hardly see any. But now you look at them and there's like bunches of daffodils along. And some of them did really well and some of them didn't. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I know that we had so much fun and we were just going to town and we ran out of bulbs and we had bought, you know, hundreds of bulbs. And so somebody went and dashed over to Garland's, God, I get it wrong all the time, Garland's, and bought these humongous bulbs. They were like $1 each or something. I mean, they're like way more expensive than the bulbs we'd got. And we planted those. And I've always wondered, are those the ones that actually lived? Did the other ones die off or what? So this just leads me to the whole idea of prosperity consciousness. And it's just so helpful to understand that we're on a journey of consciousness, that we're eternal beings, that we're here to evolve our consciousness. And life happens, and we interact with life to give us a chance to practice and to learn and to mature in our consciousness and hopefully transform our consciousness as we go along. And so just to kind of give you a quick roadmap, I thought I would share the 4 stages of prosperity consciousness. Now these are loosely related to the 4 stages that Beckwith talks about in his book. He uses slightly different terminology, but you know, we've been working with this here, and I'm being consistent with what we have been saying rather than trying to introduce his languaging. But we're all familiar with somebody who has the first stage of consciousness, right? That's victim consciousness. Now, I know none of us here have victim consciousness, but we all know somebody that has victim consciousness, right? So what are some of the characteristics of people that we know have victim consciousness? Self-pity, never wrong, self-righteousness. It's always blaming somebody else. It's someone else's fault. So therefore, they're always critical of their minister, right? We already know that. What else? Anyone else have any recollection of someone else who might have victim consciousness? Hopelessness and despair. Yeah, right. Basically, I want to say 2 things about this. First of all of us slide up and down the scale of the 4 stages of consciousness around prosperity throughout our lifetime and throughout our weeks. And there's no way to avoid that we are human beings. We do have a spiritual nature, but there are times we're going to move up and down into victim consciousness or up into empowered consciousness, and that's just the way it is. And what we want to do is notice when we're doing victim consciousness earlier so that we can then shift out of it. But victim consciousness is all around us. Politicians prey on victim consciousness. They want to create dependence so that they get votes. Right? Madison Avenue sells and advertises based on victim consciousness. People who are inspired by television ads go out and buy things thinking that their life is going to be immediately better. Right? So newspapers and television sell advertising to draw a market, but the audience that they're really focused on is what? Disasters and crises and victim consciousness. and they find fault, and they're always coming up with another scandal, and this is the latest big deal, and that's just anchoring in the whole consciousness in our culture is centered around victim consciousness. In work, it's people who are working for a living, working for a wage, working for a paycheck, but who hate their job. That would be victim consciousness. In a relationship, it is being with somebody that you don't feel passion for, that you're not co-creating something great together because you don't feel like you have any other choice. You're stuck. You're trapped. So that's the symbols of victim consciousness, and we can all come up with examples in our own life where we have been in victim consciousness. But what we're about in this church is moving out of victim consciousness into empowered consciousness. And the first step out of that is a co-creative dynamic, where we are empowered to create our own life, where we move out of being reaction to what's going on, and we begin to look at what we have created and take 100% responsibility for what we created and then make changes. Now, this can take lifetimes of work to get to the point where we're even willing to take on this first transformational step. And Robin, would you stand up here? This is Connie's daughter, and she just moved here a couple weeks ago, and she's...
And I'm...
she's stage fright. She did not want to speak, so she empowered me to speak on her behalf. But I want you to know, since she hasn't been coming to church that long, I wanted you to know that here she is. This is Robin. Yeah. She's a good sport because she's moving into empowered co-creative consciousness, and she knows that we will now all hold this and hold her in the vision of this as she moves forward. Okay? And so her life a year ago was fairly trapped. She was in, I think, Salt Lake City, and couldn't find the job, was on unemployment, was depressed, was discouraged, was just not thriving. And her mother held the vision for her that she might decide to go to college. Now, Robin did not think that she was college material. She had failed at pretty much everything that she had tried. She didn't think she was smart enough. She didn't think she had the money. There was a whole myriad of reasons why she didn't think she could go to college. But her mother held the vision for her when she could not hold it for herself. And this is one of the first glimmers of shifting from victim consciousness into co-creative consciousness, is that there's someone who's co-creating with you on your behalf. Someone who is not enabling you and not codependently rescuing you, but someone who is empowering you and equipping you to move forward. So Robin is in Salt Lake City, and she just cannot get any traction, but finally, feeling completely hopeless and feeling very, very little possibility, she went in to talk to the placement counselor, the financial aid counselor, I'm not sure who it was. All right. She went into a counseling group to get advice and get actual answers to her questions. And that was the first little baby step out of moving from victim consciousness into co-creative consciousness. She began to acquire information and learn how to apply for scholarships and apply to schools and apply for grants and to finagle her unemployment so that she could go to school and look for work. And this whole process took weeks of time when it should have taken months of time. And she's getting a little bit optimistic now, thinking maybe this could work out, maybe this could work out. And then she realizes that the school that I know another thing I want to say. They ask her, what do you want to do? And she gives the most chintzy little dream that she can squeak out, which is, I want to go to school for 10 months and get some mediocre degree that doesn't really matter that much to me. Now, this is called chintzing on your dreams. You all have heard me do a sermon on my path of chintzing on our dreams, but we don't really feel that we're entitled to have a rich, abundant life, but we feel like we can't stay in victim any longer, so we're willing to kind of settle for something that's less than who we really are.